Good morning, lovely humans. It won't feel like a hot minute, but for me, it feels like it's been a hot minute since I have talked to this camera. I kind of went through a period of overwhelming myself with consuming content to better myself, and I think I was tapped out for a second. I was like, I need to regroup before I feel like I have something new and valuable to talk about. So, here I am, and this is my attempt. Just adjusted the camera there because I felt like, I don't know, the shadowing is still kind of funny. Let's see. Is this any better? Not really. It is a hot morning. I think it's already like 30 degrees. It feels very hot and humid. Anyway, this morning I wanted to share a few things that are resonating with me from Gabor Mate and his son Daniel's book, The Myth of Normal. I'm really enjoying it. I haven't read any of his other books, but I get the sense that if you haven't read his other books, this is a good one to read or to start with. I think it's the newest one anyways, but it references a lot of his other books, and the way that the book is structured, it's looking at mental illness from kind of all dimensions of all the dimensions that impact mental illness. So race, gender, class, child types of trauma, so little t and big T trauma. He also looks at addiction, so lots of lenses, and lots of great, he also takes a look at political system too, which is interesting. So things that are resonating with me. A lot of things. One, I think, if you've listened to anything by Gabor Mate, you've probably already gotten this sense that this is how he thinks, but he talks about little t and big T trauma, and oh gosh, I'm forgetting the term now, but I think it's, he talks about I'm gonna butcher this, developmental trauma. So he talks about developmental trauma as kind of being a little bit more like that little t trauma, like the trauma that happens from needing something and it not being provided when you were being raised. So it could be that you had stressed out parents who were really busy with working multiple jobs to try and support the family, and they weren't there for you when you had issues, and so you learned to not have those feelings or bottle them up or deal with them yourself in some kind of your own found coping mechanism. And he talked about how that developmental trauma, although it doesn't seem as significant as being like raped or beaten by your parents or whatever, it still impacts us, and it's important to address. And then so I found that a really useful framing because, again, as somebody who tends to minimize their pain and struggles, it helped validate that a little bit more for me. So that was nice. I also really like the way he talks about addiction in general and how there's like a twisted wisdom in an addict, in that like there's always an underlying reason that they are seeking this, generally an escape or a social lubricant or whatever. There's a reason. There's some way that they're probably hurting or they're not feeling comfortable in their skin. And that is, could be from trauma, from the way they were raised, from society, and society not making space for them. Whatever it is, but they're trying to treat something. They haven't found the right medication. which often is a lot of like inner work. And anyway, it's exasperated by so many things, by stress, by low economic status, all the things. But he does talk about how like you can have, it's sort of an equalizer in the sense that it's not like all addicts come from a poor working class background. He worked at Insight, which is a safe injection site in Vancouver, and that area in Vancouver, he said he saw, sort of rags to riches stories too, or sorry, riches to rags stories. But really what was, I think, most interesting to me or helpful was just in the way that he broadened the definition of addiction, in that we're not just looking at people that used drugs. It's anybody really could be considered an addict that is doing some kind of behavior that is damaging to themselves or others, and it's difficult for them to stop, or it's sort of a compulsion. And this could be watching television excessively, video gaming, shopping, despite needing to save. For me, it's biting my nails and picking at my skin. I know it's not good for me, but it's some weird coping mechanism I must have developed. And he talks about how, the hardest, but I guess truest way of even starting to attempt to solve this problem or address the addiction is to look at, why are you doing it? Like, what purpose is this behavior serving? Is it to soothe you? Is it to make you forget? Is it to, what's the word? Is it to lull some of your feelings, dull the feelings, whatever it is, quiet the thoughts in your head, make you more sociable? What need are you trying to fill? And just so interesting too when he talked about heroin addicts and the way they talk about how heroin makes them feel. And it's often expressed as a warm maternal embrace. And it's like, whoa, like so much of what people are seeking is like love and acceptance and care. And if only we found more ways to do that as a society in our communities, maybe, I don't know, maybe we would all feel a lot better and be a lot more whole. So that was really interesting, and I know I'm definitely missing aspects that he talked about, but so that was really good. He did talk a little bit about like the overprescription of medications to treat mental illness, and how, well, he's a doctor himself, and so he even uses examples of how his own biases have come into play in making prescriptions, and how, insidiously, like, a lot of addictions form from over-the-counter prescriptions. And just, he really lays out how, like, the percentage of the population that is medicated has increased drastically over time. And if we want to think of ourselves as this developed nation, like, that doesn't seem like a great indicator of our progress if everyone is suffering and the only way for them to cope with living is to be on drugs. So that was really interesting. And just he talks about mortality rates from suicide and drug overdose, and just how those numbers are like much, much larger than something, say, like the COVID-19 pandemic. But we don't tend to focus on these issues because, I guess, I don't know, they're more day to day, or they just seem too big and like pervasive. I don't know what it is, but I thought that was helpful. What else? Oh, he also talks about, like, he really emphasizes, so he's a parent himself, because obviously he wrote this book with his son Daniel, as I said in the beginning. He has, I think, 3 kids, I want to say. But he uses examples where he's fucked up as a father in the book, and I really admire that humility. But he leaves a lot of space for compassion for parents. And it's not to say that we're going to pretend that they never fucked up, because a lot of people's issues stem from childhood. But it's not about blame. It's really about understanding, well, what was the issue? Where did it come from? And it's like this whole cycle, like chain reaction, right? Our parents are parented by somebody else too, and our parents are existing within often unfavorable conditions. Stress, like economic stress, emotional and social stress, mothers bearing traditionally much more burden in terms of household chores, emotional labor. So he gives a lot of grace, and I similarly find it helpful to think about my childhood and my parents with that same grace. It doesn't, you're not going to be able to change anything, obviously, and it just feels unproductive to blame and shame, especially when we live in a society. I'm going to say that 1,000 times. I feel like I've been saying that 1,000 times. We live in a society of information overload. Like, everyone and their mother has an opinion on how people should parent their children. And there's so many, like, you could read 1,000 articles and books on parenting that'll give you 1,000 different perspectives on what should be done. So first of all, like, no wonder parents are overwhelmed and they're gonna get it wrong, they're gonna be confused, and they're just humans too, right? And and then the whole, like, mothers and parents not even given any time, really, like, we're looking at the United States, to bond with their children after birth. So, like, there's not only just the pressure and stress and, like, physical and mental changes that you're dealing with just having given birth, but then it's like, okay, I gotta get back to work. Like, insane. Or just, and if you do take time off, and Greg and I were just talking about this last night, as a dad, you will probably be shamed, even if your country allows for paternity leave. It's just, like, socially, it's still not fully accepted. So, yeah, that's also just another layer that can give us a little more empathy for parents. I'm going to pause this video because I am on a very bumpy road. So, Gabor's really big also on just taking time and allowing parents to take the time to bond with their children. And one thing that he talked about that I hadn't really ever really reflected on in terms of my childhood and how it could have affected me was he talked about the whole, and I forget when this wave of parenting advice or, like, dominant beliefs around parenting came about, but I think maybe it was the 80s. No, I don't know, 80s, 90s. but the whole letting your child cry it out. So if you put your baby down to bed and it starts crying and it's not going down to sleep, you could either pick up the baby and soothe it until it falls back asleep and then put it back, or you let it cry out. Cry and cry and cry and cry until it may have exhausted itself and eventually, hopefully, falls asleep. And he talks about that not being a good thing. That it would be like having a toddler standing in front of you crying, and you say, like, sort yourself out. Like, why are you crying? Just, like, stop. Like, get over it. Whatever it is. And anytime a parent either doesn't have the ability to hold space for a child's feelings, or dismisses them, or forces the child to, like, figure it out themselves entirely, it does something damaging, right? Because we are humans, we are feeling beings, and to deny somebody that right to feel and make it contingent on the, like, love and acceptance from a parent, right? Like, child having a tantrum, being put on timeout, and basically being told, you know, you can rejoin us and, like, find acceptance and love again once you are not being difficult. And that conditionality is damaging. And anyway, I never thought about that and how it could be related to some of my feelings of lack of emotional support. And I was, from my understanding, made to cry it out. And I also just had a really difficult time sleeping in general when I was young. And I know I'd come to my parents and I'd say, you know, I hear scratching in the walls, or I can't fall asleep, and my brain will turn off. And yeah, I just had to figure it out. And sometimes just figuring it out is good, right? You build independence, and it's also great to honor the skills and the coping mechanisms that you have developed in your lifetime because of the situations you were in. And a lot of those can be really positive, but then sometimes it's hard to turn off those behaviors and impulses, and that's when it can become difficult. Like, I'm terrible at asking for help, especially when I'm sick. So, and that's the other thing that he talks about, that Gabor talks about in the book, is just how, like, percentage of complications and deaths post surgeries in general, but I think there's one specific kind he mentioned, and I forget what it was, but are much higher in women than in men, simply because women tend to take on the nurturing, carer role, and so when they are ill and unwell, there's nobody to care for them. So they go right back into their normal routine of caring for others, whereas men are more likely to have someone caring for them and taking more of the needed rest time post-surgery. And it's just like, wow, that's crazy. And just, oh my gosh, when he talks about the race dimensions of health outcomes, and how just like a black woman giving birth to a baby is, I don't remember exactly the percentage, but like way more likely for that baby to die in childbirth that if they have a white doctor versus a black doctor. And I'm like, that's insane. Like, that's really scary. Anyway, so lots of really interesting stuff there in the book, and the chapter that I just finished was talking about politics and how the politicians we elect are often some of the most traumatized people who have not healed themselves. And it's because, like, it's because they're operating in a system, right, in a structure that rewards often, like, psychopathic behavior, right, to be cold and calculated and self-serving, right. In a capitalist society, you're just trying to seek more capital gains for yourself. And yeah, so he talked a little bit about Trump, and I think his sister had wrote a book about their upbringing, and their dad seemed to be pretty terrible. And then, like, Hillary Clinton has some, like, a couple mottos or slogans or whatever about, like, don't whine and complain, like, be tough, be courageous, whatever. And there's an example in an interview she did where she talked about her mom being, like, a big inspiration to her and, like, being tough in this world, I guess, and that she was being bullied. And she goes back to her mom, I think crying, and or just telling her about what happened, and her mom said, don't come back here until you've dealt with the issue. Like, go back there and figure out how you're gonna deal with these bullies. It wasn't like, there was no validation at all. It was just like, you don't belong in this house. There's something along the lines of, yeah, we're not a family of cowards, or like, cowards don't belong here. Go back, solve the issue, then come back. And Gabor talks about how, like, examples of kind of, like, really unempathetic parenting are often waved around in society as, like, examples of inspiration and what one should strive for, and how we've built, like, such great, strong, resilient people. And it's like, I don't know, like, let's just take a moment and reflect on like, what kind of people are we building? What kind of behaviors are we rewarding? And yeah, I could just keep going on and on, but it talks about because there's a chapter on gender and the patriarchy, and again, how it harms both men and women, and a lot of the values and characteristics that women are supposed to take on require a ton of self-sacrifice and emotional labor and stuffing down of our feelings and needs. And then men, they're allowed to express anger and be assertive and yada yada, but then they must disconnect from the emotional side of themselves, lest seeming weak. And so a lot of what we do in society is force people to disconnect from themselves. And that was the other thing that I meant to talk about too, when he was talking about just all the information out there and how often the answers are staring us right in the face, or like the answers are within. And yes, there's a place for science, there's a place for medicine, for pharmaceuticals, for therapy, for all the things, but there's also a place for, like, tuning into ourselves and how we are feeling. And he talks about the psychosomatic healing and why it's so important to, like, tune into your body. But yeah, anyways, I think that's enough of me rambling about the book. I recommend it. I think it's really good. It's really interesting and insightful, and I think he writes very honestly, which I like. It's in no way have I felt like he is telling me how to live my life from this, like, ivory tower. He's, talks very frankly about his childhood trauma and the ways it's impacted his behavior. And yeah. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one, and have a wonderful day. Bye.